Today, I'm speaking with an amazing leader, Jason Dunn. Jason is the Vice President of Diversity, Sales, and Inclusion for the Cincinnati Convention and Visitors Bureau, and also former chair of the National Coalition of Black Meeting Professionals. A lot of great insights, very concrete ideas, and conversation that are necessary in our industry. Enjoy listening to my conversation with Jason Dunn. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. I'm Eric Rosenberg, and today I have the great pleasure of finally speaking with Jason Dunn, who's a very, very busy person. He's a leader in our industry. Everybody knows him, but more importantly, what he's doing is having a tremendous impact on our industry. Jason is the Vice President, Diversity, Sales, and Inclusion for the Convention and Visitors Bureau of Cincinnati. He is the immediate past chairman of the board of the National Coalition of Black Meeting Professionals, and he's also the current co-chair of the Events Industry Council of the Global Eic Task Force, of the Events Industry Council. Jason, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
It's wonderful to have you. Before we go into all the activities and the leadership role you're having, which are extremely important for our industry, as I always like to ask my guests, tell us a little bit more about your background and how did you join the industry?
Yeah, so I am originally from Columbus, Ohio, and came to Cincinnati to study for school, and met my wife here and stayed in Cincinnati since 1998, and started the Convention Bureau in 2004. How I got the job is a little interesting, and to some people may be a little perplexing. But so during 2001, there was great unrest here in Cincinnati after the 15th African-American male was shot and killed by the police here in Cincinnati. And I was in college at that point. And during that time, I was very involved from a grassroots level in protesting and essentially being one of the leaders from the student side and maybe the younger generation at that time to tell persons not to come to Cincinnati. And at that time, many conventions did not come. They pulled out. Spike Lee pulled out. Bill Cosby, before all the stuff happened the last couple of years, pulled out. Many persons supported those efforts. And what happened was from there, after the conventions poured out and the attention of tourism was front and center within the city, I was then asked from the vice mayor at the time, Alicia Reese, who's now a current county commissioner, to kind of help out in how do we solve for bringing people back and also collaborating with bringing people together to save the region, to save our city, and to kind of have those tough discussions that we were avoiding pre the boycott or unrest. And so after that, Alicia Reese asked me to come help out. And at that time, in 2004, 3 years later, after I had graduated, had a daughter, et cetera, the Freedom Center, the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, which is a Smithsonian museum that speaks to the Underground Railroad and how Ohio was impacted by that from the South. And that opening was created, and they asked me to help co-create and/or develop a strategy to get people to come to Cincinnati. So I had the local people come, and the Convention and Visitors Bureau, which we were housed at for those 6 months, had the Coalition of Black Meeting Planners at that time come in, and there was about maybe 15 or 16 of them there, and I didn't know who they were. I wasn't really officially part of the bureau, so I was just doing contract work. And that's kind of how my journey started. We had a great event with opening of the reception. And then post that particular event, I was then asked to come work for the Convention Bureau. I had then moved to Cleveland between the time they had asked me and after the event had concluded, because my wife was in medical school at Case Western Reserve. So I left her and then came here back to Cincinnati and started my career in 2004 and been here ever since for 17 years. And I've moved up from sales and event manager all the way to the first Black vice president of the Convention Bureau in its 76-year history.
That's awesome. And the way you're describing your own journey, I would say at that time it was more unusual than ever to have Black people involved. So what is it at the beginning when you joining the meetings and event industry? So I think you joined the Convention Bureau in 2004, right?
September 4th.
So tell us a little bit what it is, especially for the younger listener who might not realize how far we've come since then. What was it to be the first Black person there in the Convention Bureau, and quite frankly, very few Black people, Black leaders into our industry at that time?
Well, I think I come from a different perspective, and my lens through how I see tourism may be a slight bit different than how people have seen it and maybe still don't see the impact of it. So I saw it firsthand, meaning that, you could cripple a city by essentially starving it from the fresh economic dollars that came to a destination through conventions and tourism. And if fresh dollars are not coming in, that actually does not allow for jobs. It does not allow for economic investment. It doesn't allow for economic vitality. And frankly, it tells corporations or small businesses that this particular place or location is not ready and is not stable enough to house, host, and or secure conventions. And tourism being a major driver within our region really kind of forced people to have a discussion about the importance of it. And so as an African-American, and this is a person, period, looking at business, what I see is that we have a severe difficulty in really accepting who we are. We have a deficiency in really understanding our power. And so what I like to bring to the discussion when I first joined the organization was, how do we uplift and use tourism as an opportunity to empower communities, one, two, to advance policy by using macro resources to help micro discussions. So for example, if we are having an issue with the police, which we had in 2001, what organizations would then bring those discussions or resources or data sets or proof points to the city to help stakeholders come to a room and then kind of agree to the commonality of what we have and then build on that from national influences. So we went to the NAACP, we went to back to the church groups, went to the Urban League and others, and LULAC and other organizations that really focus on grassroots efforts. And what that did was bring 10, 15, 20, 30,000 people to a region that frankly uplifted the local organization or the regional or state organizations that were a part of those groups. And then it gave them something to, frankly, feel like they're a part of the fabric of our community. And when the conventions left, it just empowered or emboldened those local chapters or affiliates to do the work that they were founded to do. And so I've looked through tourism through that lens, not necessarily as an economic lens, but as a lens of empowerment, where we're helping to satisfy whatever the angle is, or not angle, but whatever the objective of a group is, and use their national resources to help them locally. And that's how I kind of looked at it. And it's helped me align my passion, which has helped me love this job and help the things that I hope to solve for the rest of the country through the work that we're doing, as you mentioned earlier.
That's awesome. And to your point, you are at the origin, and you're going to publish next year, if I'm not mistaken, the first international travel report that highlight the significance of the Black traveler in the hospitality industry, the first equity report card. So what type of data are you can we expect for next year, and what will have the impact in our industry?
Yeah, so when I was chairperson of Coalition of Black Meeting Professionals, we partnered with MMGY Global, the Black Travel Alliance, and NABHOOD to really talk about the impact of Black travel. And we wanted to use the exact same research data company that many CVBs have used, from tier 1 down to tier 3 companies. So there wasn't any confusion on the credibility of the study.
Right.
And so we asked MNGY Global to use the exact data points, not exact data points, but exact structure, processes of what they've done outside of similar research projects. And what we hope to do via the 2020 conversation, not only with the pandemic, but also the social unrest, was to give people a sense of power, that these conventions are not just cheap conventions that come in. In fact, some conventions of color actually have pushed hotels and cities past their projections for their revenue or ROI. So what we've hoped to do is give people the ability to see, one, the power of Black travelers and organizations. Two, to give the data to people who are in particular situations where they have to sell to get resources or budgets, or convince stakeholders that this is, frankly, the new demographics that are spending money and traveling. And then this is the data set that we need to support it. And then third, it encourages people to come out of their shell and see that demographics are changing. It's 2021. The next 5 to 10 years, the country, frankly, will be minority. So there won't be an actual majority. So we have to begin to look at different ways and think about broadening the conversation when it comes to budget, when it comes to talent, and when it comes to being strategic on how we're looking at the future and building our database and our subsets of marketing opportunities.
Awesome. Now, I'm trying to bring information to mainly and primarily business owners in the meetings and event industry. So for a small business owners, what is the role that we can play, especially as hospitality professional, in ensuring that people have a welcoming experience and that we're conscious about diversity, and we're not just paying lip service to say, okay, I checked the box, that actually the groundwork hasn't been done and the experience is not what it should be?
I would suggest that people take a look around what other communities are doing around them. One, I would then look at the data that I just suggested and the data that's coming out with our partnership with Destination, with DI and other organizations with the assessment that you mentioned. And then three, I would begin to look at the future demographics of their regions, their city, their local municipalities, et cetera, and to see if they're aligned with their future customer. And if they're not aligned with the future customer, then internally you have to have a real discussion. First, again, look at the data. I don't advise anyone to not make decisions that are not based off data. Look at the data, look at the new consumer base, and then have a self discussion. Are you really talking to that individual market? And if you're not, what is it that they want? What are the trends they want, right? And then I would broaden the conversation with those folks who are making decisions that are actually talking to those target markets, and ensure that you reflect the people of whom you're trying to go after and to increase your consumer base. So for me, it is a honest reflection of where's your base at, what's your growth opportunities, and do you resemble or reflect your growth opportunities, and are you properly budgeting for that? And I think you have to make goals with a broader sense of purpose, and not just the bottom line, but also what are you known for? What's the compassion around the decision? And are you and the right folks in the room to make a decision happen? And that's what I try to align my team with, and what I've lived my life by. And to date, it's been a successful equation.
Absolutely. Now, you said at the beginning of our conversation that, first of all, you were protesting, and then you sit down with the different parties and actually brought solutions. Is that also the rationale why, when you were chair of the National Coalition of Black Meeting Professionals, you started reaching out to different organizations like MPI, DI, Events Industry Council?
Yes, that's a good question. I appreciate you asking that. So I have to tell you, for a long time, which is what I hope that people who are listening to this, who are in positions of leadership, do not do what was done to me, not necessarily in a purposeful way, but it just happened in what it is. Most of the time, Black people, brown people, LGBT community, et cetera, are pigeonholed into a particular market because of the ethnicity of our skin, which is fine, which makes sense from a very surgical level. But as you begin to broaden out, understand different talent bases can talk to different people, you can't just leave those persons of color in that particular base. So I was pigeonholed for a long time, but there are other persons of color who sold to other markets and other organizations, et cetera, that I did not know. And what I found is that our particular members, for the most part, were pigeonholed. And what I wanted to do was to expand that, necessarily to professional development as well, but also how do we connect these other groups who appear to have or don't have diversity. And then two, they want diversity, but don't know who to talk to. So we had an opportunity to engage in that. And I think lastly, the professional development opportunities where MPI has and EIC and other Connect and other organizations, we have to do a self-reflection too, to figure out What are they offering that we're not offering? And so I think the collaboration at that point, we were all common from the actual pandemic. So it made us all kind of self-reflect on how do we survive if we're not collaborating with each other. We have weaknesses, we have strengths. They have weaknesses, they have strengths. So how do we bring that together? And that's what we did. And I argue that for the past 17, 18 months, we have strengthened that. EIC with the Equity Task Force has been a huge deal, but more than it happened if we didn't have the collaboration with NCBNP last year. MPI with their broadening of whom they're speaking with, their marketing, some of the sessions that we've co-hosted together would not have happened if we didn't have a discussion in 2020. Connect Faith or Connect organization, that would not have happened. The partnerships that we had. So I think in DI with the assessment and the Mint overhaul, accepting what diversity organizations are represented and which aren't, all these collaborations would not have happened should we have not spoken last year. And I think that is better for the industry. It's better for the organizations. And frankly, it was better for me as a person because it let me see that I have skill sets, not just within what I was told to do for 16 years, but for this last year, it's broadened my way to look at people differently too. And I hope they did the same for them as well.
That's awesome. I love hearing that from you. It's really inspiring. You mentioned the Event Industry Council Equity Task Force. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that is being done there? And if anybody's listening would like to contribute to that, what they can be doing?
Yeah, so the EIC task force is number one focus is to accelerate the eradication of racism in hospitality industry. It's a big task, but our goal is to do that. And there's 33 organizations that are represent the actual task force, and we are all committed to finding ways, strategic ways of how to help people achieve that goal. So what will happen is we are in our third or fourth phase of discussions. There is a survey that will be sent out throughout the industry, UK, well, globally, frankly, here to US, UK, et cetera, South America. And the goal is to send a survey out via our organizations that are a part of it, that represent over 400,000 individual members. We'll send those out. We'll collaborate get the information, look at it, assess it, and then we'll put out a report to the actual industry on what our findings were, and then we'll have steps to solve for what those findings were and how to do it, and in various ways throughout the discussion. So there'll be a toolkit that'll be developed similar to what we've already do for EIC, and that'll be spread out throughout the industry. And we hope folk will kind of accept those guidelines as we see it, and that will help them solve for the issues that we find via the survey.
And with you mentioned toolkit, right?
Yes.
So what would be the expected outcome of the toolkit? What can people, how could people use that future toolkit?
Yeah, so the toolkit we based off of, how do you select your board members? What are that process? Second, how are you identifying, how do you do budgets, or who are you marketing to? I think the other piece is what kind of HR policies are you looking at when you're hiring your employees? There are sessions. Do you have a diverse panel? Are you representing those individual objectives that really affect your individual membership? Who are you talking to? Is some of your policies that you have internally divisive, or they're more welcoming? So there's certain kind of things that I think from a basic level that we'll be able to assist with, and also to that complex level as well. And then we'll have various consultants that will be available for people who want to kind of do intricate discussions and strategies. So again, at the most, we'll have easy things that people can look at that are fundamental. Like my mom used to say, make sure it's low enough for the ghost to get it, meaning eat the grass. So it's low. It's not in a way that you can't read it and comprehend it, but it's in a very simplistic style, so folks can apply it to the actual organizations in every aspect of it.
Very interesting. Now, I was listening to it and I was thinking, and that's a personal thought. As a Jew who left Europe because of anti-Semitism and came to America 8 years ago, I've always obviously been very concerned with racism and very pro-inclusion. And what I've seen over the years sometimes is that I'm the first one to speak against racism of all kind. And then I see sometimes now the people that I'm speaking for that are actually not saying anything when anti-Semitism is coming up. And and the question is not about anti-Semitism as such. The question for me is, I do believe, unfortunately, that racism will always exist somehow in the world because of the way people are raised. And as an industry, which is bringing people together, which is changing the world by doing that, we can have an impact on educating people, at least opening their eyes and making sure that there is indeed inclusion and that we are speaking up against all type of racism. So from that point of view, what can we do as an industry when we face with people who are not inclusive or people that have prejudices because of their education or background, whatever it is? What can we do and how can we speak up and change that so that we do have inclusive meetings?
Well, I think one is you got to make it a space where people can have open discussion and be uncomfortable. And I think, too, you have to sometimes discussions are easier when there's data that backs up the emotion, and emotion is taken out of the conversation, and data is there, and it's hard to argue with data most of the time. Lastly, I would say, as for me, there's been moments where there's been meetings where I've been in rooms with people who have a cold heart and dark ears and necessarily looking at in the right direction. And so you have to keep having that discussion. And at some point, if those persons don't or choose not to move, you have to either make a decision to remove them from the equation or go around them, knowing that you still have that anchor that's not ready to accept the world. And so that's when a leader or a corporation then has to choose with what their character or what their vision statements are, or mission statements are, and what that means to them if that person still aligns within the umbrella of their organization. And so that's kind of where we are at this moment. It's 2021. I mean, I don't know how else to have the discussion other than to be honest and blunt about it.
I totally align with you, and I love what you're saying about having the leadership to make decision and having an uncomfortable conversation. I have to tell you, on a personal experience, I've been in situation in a certain circle where people are saying that they want to have the uncomfortable conversation until it became uncomfortable. And then they didn't want to have the conversation anymore.
Yeah, they didn't want to have anymore. Understood.
There was the paying lip service, but to your point, it starts with the leadership.
Right.
So you've been involved now for about 20 years in this industry. How do you see the next 10 years, and what would be a realistic, optimistic, inspiring view of our industry in the next 10 years?
So I think in the next 10 years, I would hope that we are all in a space where we are being extremely equitable in our resources and budget. I will hope that we're in a space where supply diversity is no longer a conversation, but an expectation. I will hope that we're in a space where these discussions that we're having now are unfamiliar, and because it doesn't make sense to have them because we're all on the same page. I will hope that in the next 9 to 10 years that there isn't a need to continue to have an assessment. I hope that when we roll out the DI assessment, that when we see the progress from this year to 10 years from now, that there is a complete turnaround of the industry. And I also hope at the end that people don't feel like we're taking something away from them, but we're broadening the table when we talk about diversity. And I think if we started from the end and end where I began, I think that's really where we should be. And I think that's really a passion of mine, that we as an industry really see that we're broadening the table, we're not shrinking it. And the more that we broaden, the more power we have. People will tell you that I'm about how do we look at this organization, look at this industry, and how do we take over? I really believe that tourism can lead the globe in almost every aspect of business but we have a self-esteem issue where we see ourselves only as a hotel, filling a hotel and doing events in the convention center. And I think that we're way more than that. But I think we limit ourselves with just being comfortable and not pushing back on stakeholders, not pushing back on our elected officials, not pushing back on the narrative that all we do is go to Disney World or eat well and play basketball. I think, we have opportunity to shape policy. And that's really what I hope that comes from this conversation. And what I really tried to push last year when I was the chairman of the Coalition of Black Media Professionals, I tried to push and change policy, and hopefully we did that long term.
That's awesome. Now, last question for today, Jason, if you allow me. Whether we're talking about diversity, inclusion, or we're talking about the role of our industry, there seems to be a disconnect between what we are and all the great outcomes we could bring, and what people that are actually voting policy seems to understand of our industry. We were the first to be cut back. We're probably the last who are going to come back. And that reminds me about, over 10 years ago, the previous crisis, where it was kind of the same. We need to convince people. We need to make a policymaker understand how important what we do is. What can we do for the future? And how can we involve the small business owners to convey that agenda?
Yeah. So again, I think let me answer your question directly, and I have something to say. So as small businesses, you are correct, and I think how we broaden that discussion is in Cincinnati here proper. We have various ethnic chambers, and for a long time, there was only one particular chamber that was getting a lot of the benefit of conventions coming in. And I think what we changed in 2004 was that we brought in whom was a part of the RFP process, how the B2B opportunities were managed from whether it be the Black Chamber, the Chinese Chamber, the LGBTQ, the Hispanic Chamber, et cetera. So there was a conversation on how do we get everybody in a room. So we had that partnership within the Bureau. We had members of each of those individual organizations with reciprocal membership. And then when we had particular conventions that specifically asked for those particular groups to have access to bidding, we married them together. So again, our goal was to ensure, like, not only that we had people coming to the city, but when they came, there was a legacy of them empowering and also profiting off of their demographics coming in. So you can bid on everybody's conventions, but when people come into town, they sometimes ask for, which I think they should, are there any demographics that look like me? And then how can I empower them with the dollars that I'm bringing? So I think there has to be a purposeful marriage or intentional conversation with the local community. And when the national, international folks come in, whether it's leisure and or conventions, that they're at the table having those discussions. And I think that only increases or strengthens the fabric of a region, because not only the local folks getting the piece of it, but also the national people are actually investing in their own community when they come into a destination, which makes sense. So you're almost like that, you're ushering everybody to the table and then giving them the opportunity to do B2B. And I think which makes sense from a business perspective, and also makes the Bureau or that industry whom is leading that discussion a key stakeholder in both sides of the equation, which gives you more influence and relevancy and credibility in both sides of the communities. Is that
awesome? Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I hope one day, as Ellen DeGeneres said once, we will judge people only by the type of car they drive. I love it. But I will say, if we have a little bit of time, sure.
I would say to leaders who are listening to this, and not to take it down a notch, but in 2020, I was furloughed from March of 2020 to October of 2020, and I tell you that the Coalition of Black Media Professionals really saved my life. I was at a point where I was very depressed. My family, come from a very strong family. I have 6 brothers. My father has 7 brothers and 2 sisters. So a very male-dominated home. And so when my son looked up to me and asked, "Dad, are you going to work?" and I had to tell him no. My daughter looked, saw the depression on my face. My wife knew it, but I just didn't say anything about it. I would say that if you look at some of the past programming from last year for Coalition, it was about empowerment and being inspired, and going back to your roots, knowing that you've been through something already and that you're built for this moment and that you'll come out of it. And many of us struggle with being vulnerable to a point where we really can talk about ourselves. And I know that some of you who are leaders had to be tough and make decisions because you had to feel like you were in charge, because your board was expecting you to make decisions on the budget, who you're cutting, who you're not cutting, what are you going to do, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so you didn't get an opportunity to really see the humanity in what 2020 brought to all of us, which frankly brought us all together. And I would just tell each of you don't forget to be a human to your staff. Don't forget to be a human to the people you represent. Don't forget to be a human to your vendors, because you don't always have to be show strength, because many of the people who did not come back in 2021, they didn't come back because they were looking at the leadership and how you made decisions and how they were treated when they were called non-essential employees, or how they were treated when they were managed out, or how they were treated when they were kept, but no communication was given. They didn't see the compassion. So I would just offer, just have the compassion. The authenticity of leadership is big. And as you begin to understand that, you'll see that your people will be more loyal to you. It's easy for you to make decisions. I think it's easy for you to be honest with your stakeholders. And at that point, you take some things out of yourself that allow you to be centered. And that's what I found in 2020 that has given me the encouragement of 2021 to move forward and continue to love this industry and empower people through tourism, which I firmly believe. And thank you for the opportunity. And hopefully this resonates with someone who's listening or watching.
Well, at least the first person listening to you right now resonates a lot with me. So thank you so much for sharing that, Jason. And, authenticity, vulnerability. I can only think of the roller coaster, the emotional roller coaster that we're all going through. And to your point, when you have to decide who in your team you'll have to follow or lay off, and definitely as well as business owners and entrepreneurs. I can only think of two other episodes in the Business of Meaning podcast. One is Cesar Quintero, who's a friend of mine who was in a tough situation with his business and actually opened up to his team and in 1 year completely turned it over. Yeah. And another one, which is in the first episode, Dr. Sherry Walling is sharing her expertise about mental health. She's a psychologist, and especially she's an entrepreneur herself and married to an entrepreneur. So to your point, it's also one of the topics in the future that I think we should be more open about, and that will be helping a lot of us. So Jason, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you.
Jason, thank you again for taking the time to speak with me today. Very insightful conversation. And I can wait for the report to come out next year with all the data that you were talking about that is so important to support the essential conversations. If you want to reach out to me, please go on LinkedIn, connect with me there, or join the Facebook group, www.evenbusinessformula.com/group, where we discuss everything related to owning your business in the meetings and event industry. Thank you.